Hey, what is up everyone? It's David here. Bitcoin recently touched that $30,000 mark again, and this time it seems like it's mostly contributed by the government officials being able to retrieve a big portion of those Bitcoins that was lost during the Colonial Pipeline attack. And on top of that, El Salvador just became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. So I want to share some of my thoughts around that. And most importantly, towards the end of this video, I want to look at a few qualitative indicators and charts to see whether Bitcoin have bottomed and getting ready for that reversal. So as usual, if you do learn something new, it would mean the world to me if you could just gently smack that like button right there. And no, this video is not financial advice or recommendation to do anything. So without further ado, let's. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Colonial Pipeline situation where the government officials was able to retrieve the majority of those Bitcoins that was lost in that saga, if you will. As many of you may or may not know, at the time when the payment was made to the attackers, the Bitcoins was worth approximately $4.4 million, but because of the declining value of Bitcoin, after they retrieved those Bitcoins, it's only worth about 2.3 million. And the rest of this article is essentially comments from the government officials on what else they found as part of the journey to retrieve those digital assets, not to mention a bigger emphasis on critical infrastructure companies that invest more to protect themselves against cyber attacks. So you can think of these almost as tailwinds to learn more about cybersecurity companies as well. My thoughts on the situation is this. Government officials being able to retrieve majority of those digital assets is good. That means that it's alleviating some of the anxiety from institutional investors that, hey, I could one day lose a big portion of those digital assets permanently. So that should definitely help the institutional investors. And on top of that, it should give government officials more ideas in terms of how to regulate Bitcoin as an asset class. So that will further help institutional adoption. But what concerns me, and maybe concerning is not the right word, the transactions on a Bitcoin network flows through a wallet address. Without a private key, it's basically impossible to access that wallet. How the government officials got the private key to access the wallet to retrieve those assets, it's way beyond me. And my question is, how the heck did they get it? That definitely spooked the market a little bit. That's enough bad news. The next thing is that El Salvador just became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender after passing law. What that essentially means is that the price of goods and services can be shown in Bitcoin instead of dollars. Tax contributions can be paid with the digital currency, and exchanges in Bitcoin will not be subject to capital gains tax. For people who are really into Bitcoin and believe that Bitcoin can be a currency of the future, El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender is a step forward towards that direction. For me personally, it's more of a store of value, not exactly a currency. That argument is a little bit stretched, but I am just super excited to see all of this development, because if you were to ask me whether Bitcoin is a legitimate asset class 3-4 years ago, between 2016 and 2017, I was so skeptic that it wouldn't even be something that I consider. But today, whether you're choosing to allocate capital into Bitcoin or not, this whole development across the world, I think it's just incredibly interesting. And yes, if you are a Bitcoin skeptic, then this could be one of the biggest speculative bubbles in the world, in history, and it could come crumbling down anytime soon. I don't believe that to be the case, but hey, you have your concerns, I have my concerns. The last thing I want to do is to look at a few qualitative indicators to see whether Bitcoin's sentiment have been absolutely crushed and whether the Bitcoin price is getting ready to reverse. Essentially, whether it has bottomed. One of the things that I like to do is look at the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index produced by alternative.me. I'll leave a link in the description box below. It is free and I'm not sponsored. If you just scroll down a little bit, you can actually see what data sources they use to produce their index. They use around 25% of volatility, momentum, and then there's social media, surveys, dominance, and also trends as well. So Google Trends, that is. So the way to interpret this index is that when people are overly greedy, that's almost a sign of a market top. It doesn't have to be, but that's generally a sign. And when the index is basically flying over to the other end, when people are really, really scared, it's almost indicating that the market have starting to reach a bottom. It's not quite there yet, because the bottom of this index will be around 10. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see how the fear and greed index have developed over time. So let me move my portrait so that you can see better. You can see that currently we went from 13 to 14 recently, but the May correction have really crushed the sentiment down to around 10. So 10 is, I think, the absolute bottom. But what I'm trying to say is that even though it has recovered, I still think that there's quite a bit of over bullishness in the system. And one of the ways to tell is that recently there was a poll that was done by Bloomberg essentially asking whether the Bitcoin bubble have finally burst. The cryptocurrency fell almost 30% to 31,000. I put yes just for lows, but what's really interesting is that 44% of people said no, it hasn't burst finally. So there's still quite a bit of bullishness in the system. And until that bullishness subsides a little bit and people actually accepted that the bubble have finally burst, I think that's when the sentiment will really get crushed. Like, for example, if the yes is basically at a 40% and no is basically at around 30 to around 25%, when the sentiment is incredibly low and people are really fearful, I think that's when the sentiment is absolutely crushed and then we are getting ready for a reversal. I don't think that is the case just yet. And if we look at the charts, this is the first support line which broke through, and this is one of the reasons why people are really scared when it did break through. This is the second support line which was recently challenged and fell below that and then quickly snapped back. So there are broader concerns that if it passes this second support line right here and it stays below that, then the chances of it reaching to 20,000, the probability becomes higher essentially. I've talked about latecomers in the past. It's basically just this group of people who invested above 40,000 that, as the price shoots up, they just want to exit their position. So quite a bit of selling pressure. And the one thing I keep mentioning is that if you look at the correction recently, it's only been about a month, right? And if we take a trip down memory lanes, I know I keep talking about this, the correction of 50% or more takes around 50, 60, 90 days to recover. And you can look at the previous ones too. So the bigger the correction, the bigger the crash, the longer it takes to recover. I think that it's only been about 30 days. We still have quite a bit of time to go. I'm not counting on the correction being finished anytime soon. I still think we have quite a bit to go. And I think that the qualitative indicators are telling us that there's still some bullishness in the system that will probably need to be shaken out before we get ready for a higher leg up. So from my point of view, I'm going to be a lot more opportunistic as the fear and greed index get close to extreme fear, anywhere between that 10 to 11 mark. I'll add to my position in both Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I do think that the correction will take a little bit longer to recover. I don't think it's over yet. I think that there's still quite a bit of sentiment that needs to be shaken out before we get ready for that reversal. Thank you so much for hanging out with me all the way to the end. If you did learn something new, consider gently smacking the like button right there. Subscribe to my channel, click onto the bell so that when I release future videos, I can let you know. If you're still bored, I left a video on the screen that I think it's incredible to watch next. And as usual, Otto will always do the honors, and I'm gonna see you very, very soon.